I agree with David Lose, who writes, prayer is not only at the heart of Christian life, it's also at the heart of a lot of Christian frustration, misunderstanding, and even pain. Prayer is difficult to understand, at least in my own opinion it is. You see, I don't know why some prayers seem to be answered by God and others aren't. I don't understand why children can pray for their mother to be cured of her cancer and she dies instead, leaving them not only floundering in a sea of grief, but unsure of the goodness of God. I don't understand why a child can endure years of hell by sexually abusive parent, praying all the while for it to end, and God is seemingly absent or deaf to the child's prayers. There are a lot of things that I don't understand about prayer. So let me be clear at the outset this morning. I'm not here to provide answers. I have my own questions about prayer. But I think that maybe if I can start with my own honest questions about prayer, it then becomes possible for me to move on to my own honest convictions about it. We humans like for things to be rational. We like our formulas, and we like them to add up. We count on the fact that every time we add 2 plus 2, we're going to get 4. And many of us tend to approach prayer as we would any other formula. In the opening verses of the 11th chapter of Luke's Gospel, the disciples asked Jesus for a formula. Teach us to pray, they say. And Jesus provides them with a model for prayer, which has become known as the Our Father or the Lord's Prayer. And true to our nature, we have pretty much turned these guidelines for prayer into a formula. Not paying a whole lot of attention to the words, but trusting in the fact that if we recite the prayer properly, something unseen and spiritual will take place. We will receive spiritual protection, we will find favor in God's eyes, or we may even be delivered from eternal damnation. And so in Luke's Gospel, immediately following this model for prayer, Jesus follows it up with a sort of parable, which provides us with this morning's sermon text. And in the parable, Jesus invites us to imagine ourselves late at night, midnight in fact, fretting over the late arrival of a house guest. Apparently a guest with a large appetite, because we find ourselves banging on the door of a neighbor asking for 3 loaves of bread. Being wakened from a sound slumber, our neighbor naturally grumbles a bit, pointing out the fact that the doors have already been locked and the children are asleep. And although at first he refuses to help us out, he does so anyway. And our Bibles tell us that Jesus says that because of our persistence, he will get up and give us whatever we need. But in fact, the original Greek word, which is translated in verse 8 as persistence, actually means shameless. You see, persistence doesn't even make sense within the context of the parable, because the person only asks once and the neighbor responds. However, the late night request was a little brazen, wasn't it? One might even call it bold and shameless. Waking a neighbor up in the middle of the night for 3 loaves of bread to entertain a guest with. And yet that's how Jesus advises us to approach God. We approach God shamelessly and boldly, calling out our needs as we see them. Have you ever known people to struggle over the right thing to say when they pray? I've often heard people worry over their words, confiding, I don't know if I'm supposed to ask for healing or an end to suffering or what. And so for fear of praying the wrong thing, they punt to God. You know what they need, God, so I leave it in your hands. But the way I understand this morning's text, we don't have to worry about saying the wrong words, because there are no wrong words when we're talking to God. We are invited to speak out our heart's desires. We are invited to enter into an honest relationship with God, an authentic one. We don't have to fret over whether we're asking for the right thing or not. We're invited to be shameless in our requests. But there's a risk in asking shamelessly, isn't there? And we all know what that risk is. Our wishes may not be granted. And then where are we? We're standing on some very shaky ground, that's where. Jesus tells us to ask shamelessly, ask in a bold manner, and it will be given to you. But I have boldly and persistently asked. I have asked for at least 50 people in attendance on Sunday mornings. And it wasn't given to me. Going back to my earlier examples, what about the children who shamelessly pray for their mother to be healed of cancer, and she isn't? And so we are faced with a dilemma. Either something is wrong with God, God either won't respond, God is delaying the response, or God is powerless to respond. And none of these options are particularly appealing to us. Or there is something wrong with us. We have asked for the wrong thing. We don't have enough faith, or we're unworthy of God's response. Self-images which aren't the best in the world. But I think there's another option. It's not so much there is something wrong with God or with us, but rather there may be something wrong with how we see our relationship with God.